welcome back to David Berry 75's channel. I'm your guest reader, Tony, and if you'd like to guest read, definitely contact David via email, or you can contact him in Discord by sending him a direct message. All right, let's go ahead and get started. This is Section 2, Chapter 1, Incarnation and Re-Incarnation. Probably no truth has been more completely inverted by the ignorant and concealed by the learned than that of reincarnation. In every age, it has been thought necessary by the priesthood to overawe the uneducated masses by some species of pious jugglery and the popular theory of reincarnation, as understood and taught at the present day, is a typical example of truth thus perverted. By the reincarnation, we mean, as now currently understood, the doctrine of the rebirth of the human soul in various human forms and personalities in different ages upon the same planet. Note: the reader must bear in mind that the doctrine of human reincarnation is not, strictly speaking, a doctrine of occultism. It is a theoretical doctrine of Oriental sacerdotalism, formulated by the priesthood either to conceal the real truth or to account for what they themselves could not comprehend or explain. The same thought is expressed by Raga Hiloy, a very ancient sage of India, in his book Illuminated Brahmanism, the True Theosophy. In every bundle of theological chaff, there is undoubtedly concealed a grain of genuine truth. This is particularly the case with this doctrine. Up to a given point, its teachings are thus of truth itself, but beyond this point, the doctrine of rebirth into physical conditions becomes one of the greatest delusions with which the mystical student has to deal. To those who are purely upon the plane of appearances, it possesses an almost irresistible attraction because it appears to account in a most rational and philosophical manner for the wide differences manifested in the mental, social, and moral conditions of humanity. Upon the external plane, it seems to settle the question of good and evil and harmonizes all our inequalities with what seems divine justice. All these delusive appearances, however, are but empty shadows of the phenomenal world. They can only deceive those who are entirely upon the external plane and who have accepted such teachings without verifying the doctrines for themselves. There are two methods of verification: one, the actual experience of the soul; the other, the response of the soul to the thoughts and ideas we derive from an author's work. Unfortunately, the latter kind of verification is subject to the very serious drawbacks. A mediumistic nature may respond to error because of the more potent thought of the writer, or, if oversensitive, may be superficial enough to respond to an erroneous idea through pure sentiment. These means have been seized by the inversion brethren to enable them to fasten upon the sensitive minds and mediumistic natures of the Western race these erroneous, delusive doctrine of karma and reincarnation. The most finely spun idea of the higher life, or Divanchan of the masters, and the blissful nirvana have been and are being presented by a host of sentimental, spiritually sick, mystical writers to explain the glorious mysteries of the nature and the secret doctrine of all religious philosophies, of which they themselves, in the real truth, know very little. Apart from the mediumistic ideas, which are projected towards them by the inversion magi, the whole craze is merely a metaphysical delusion cast over their mentalities by means of a magnetic glamour to deceive them and their readers. The reader must not suppose that because a person studies the various branches of occult science, tries to lead an ideal life, and after acquiring a very large stock of book lore occultism, begins to write and publish works upon mystical subjects, that the person is beyond the worldly plane. On the contrary, this class are the most external of all, because they become dominated by the thought form of certain occult leaders upon the physical plane, and their sensitive natures become absolutely blind to the real spiritual truth. We have seen numerous examples of this among the popular writers upon modern theosophagy. The soul alone is capable of penetrating the realm of shadows and seeing through the inverted images to learn the real truth. It seems very strange that the external followers of the path which leads to physical reincarnation can be so blind as to imagine that this earth is the only place within God's infinite universe whereon divine justice can be satisfied and due punishment meted out to the evildoer. The life beyond is far more real, far more earnest, and a much more conscious life than here on earth. Surely, then, the soul can work out its redemption there better than here. Surely, the soul ought to be granted the privilege of knowing for what wrong is. It is being made to suffer. But this is not the case according to the fallacies of the esoteric Buddhism. But alas, the spiritual blind are blind indeed. They have eyes to let them see. For modern Buddhistic theosophy cannot perceive in the slightest degree beyond the dull veil of external matter. As a typical example of such material conceptions, we will quote for a publication professing to give the secret doctrines of all religions, the mystery of the ages by Marie Countess of Caithness. In a footnote upon the subject of karma, page 143, the writer says, "Karma is the law of consequences by which every act receives its exact recompense in the next life when the soul is born again. But unless the same soul passes on through a succession of earth lives, such as a compens, it is impossible, and either could it expedite, I can't even say that, expedite, or make amends for the injuries it may have done to others, unless again brought into contact with them. So thoroughly materialistic are the ideas conveyed in the above extract that one would think the esoteric Buddhism was nothing but materialism run to seed. According to such erroneous theories, we are to believe that recompense for evil doing is impossible except by physical rebirth. Such writers are so destitute of the higher spiritual perception that they cannot comprehend any process of repentance and purification except upon the material earth, while encased within a material organism. We can only say that the followers of such, that when authors set themselves up such a pinnacle of knowledge as to declare what is not possible within the mighty space of spiritual existence, they ought to be in a position to verify their assertions. If they cannot do this, then they are simply boasting pretenders to a state of knowledge and spiritual development which they do not possess, and seeing that their teachings do not in any sense agree with the actual experience of those who have penetrated the realm of spirit and investigated the mysteries of life for themselves, we challenge their right to speak with such authority. How different from such ideas are the real truths of nature. How different are spiritual realities from such oriental theories and dreamy speculations. The talented author of Art Magic and Ghostland, who for years have investigated the various unseen realms of life for himself, gives the world the brief result of his lifelong research in the latter work. Speaking upon reincarnation, this author says, "To my dim apprehension, and in view of my long years of wandering through spirit spheres, where teaching spirits and blessed angels guided by soul's ardent exploration, this brief summary of our pre-existent states explains all that the reincarnationalists and nationists have labored so sedulously to theorize upon. The universal and reiterated assertions of myriad of spirits in every stage of a progressive beyond convinced me there was no return to mortal birth, no retrogression in the scale of cosmic being, as a return to material incarnations undoubtedly would be, and all the demands of progress, justice, and advancement are supplied by the opportunities offered the soul in the sphere of spiritual existence." Note, at the time these books were written, 1875 to 1876, modern theosophists knew nothing of the Buddhistical theories they had since adopted. Our author refers to the reincarnation theory of the spiritualist of France. Not until the Theosophical Society removed its headquarters to India did it go crazy after India's subtle delusions. The same author concludes the chapter of his experience in the following elegant words: "I stood on the threshold of glorious lands where my eyes could perceive the radiance of celestial spheres. The memory of those brightness will warn and beckon me upwards forever." The personal experience of thus narrated corresponds exactly in their results with those of the present writers, and also with many other true spiritual initiated occultists with whom we are associated. Can the careful tabulated results of all our united labors count for naught? It is possible that the unanimous but legitimate conclusion of scores of spiritual investigators, each of all of whom were specially qualified for research by reason of their own soul development, are false and delusive, must the result of our own personal research and actual experience of the soul within the realm of spirit can be cast away as unreliable, simple, because they conflict with an old fossilized theory of some priestly metaphysicians. Not so, dear reader, not so. Prove all things, says the apostle. Hold fast that which is good, and such is our humble intentions and our advice to all students searching for truths. We repeat that we have so often said to those who have studied under our care that reincarnations are taught by modern writers is nothing but a theory of the physical intellect. In other words, it is the metaphysical outcome of an intellectual force destitute of spiritual intuition or truth. It is an attempt of external mind to harmonize good and evil and nothing more. It contains nothing approaching to the pure intentions of the spirit of its composition. It was formulated to deceive by cunning priestly minds in the first instance, and afterward accepting as a divine truth by those who possesses nothing but their intellects to guide them in their grouping for truth. Knowing as we do the why and wherefore of its present diffusion of error, we challenge all esoteric Buddhists to produce one single individual or responsible medium who has penetrated the realm of spirit for himself, who can truthfully say that the theory agrees with the actual results of his own personal investigations. From the beginning to the end, this reincarnation and karma doctrine of Buddhism is a purely external theory which tries to explain the apparent contradictions of physical nature. Hence, it is destitute of spiritual proof or the possibility of spiritual proof, and it is palmed off upon the mental currents of Western thought as emanating from supposed holy Mahatmas. But we deny in tutu that such a theory is taught or ever has been taught as a true theory by any real adept. The magical hierophants of the inversive magi are beings we consider not worthy of the name adept because they are the legionaries of dark satellite, and as such are only adepts so far as the mysteries of practical magic are concerned. They cannot penetrate beyond the astral zone of the cosmic and magnetic elementals. Hence, they know absolutely nothing of the higher states of the soul world or the mysteries of angelic life. They deny their very existence and substitute of delusive devachan and dreamy nirvana of nothingness in their place. Before going any further, we would impress upon our students the fact that there is not a single doctrine within the whole range of occult science that is not susceptible in its interpretation to the well-known Latin proverb, Gano salis. Further, that every truth is a paradox when viewed from different planes. This latter fact is especially true regarding reincarnation. We now commence at the point where we left off in our previous chapter, in the descent of life into external conditions. From the point we see it enter and successively pass through the mineral, vegetable, and animal life waves of the planet in obedience to the higher and more interior laws of its own special round. The divine attributes are ever seeking to unfold their involved potentialities. No sooner is one form dispensed with or its capabilities exhausted than a new and still higher form is brought into recreations, each in its turn becoming more complex in its structure and diversified in its functions. Thus, we see the atom of life commencing in the mineral of the external world, working upward and outward. The grand spiral of its evolutionary life is carried forward slowly, imperceptibly, but always progressively through the higher states. There is no form too simple, no organism too complex for the inconceivably marvelous adaptability of the human soul in its divine struggle of progressive life. Throughout the entire cycle of necessity, the character of its genius, the degree of its spiritual emanation, and the state of life to which it originally belonged are preserved with mathematical exactitude. These states correspond in a general sense to the four ancient elements: fire, earth, air, and water. Yet, as a matter of purification alone, each atom must pass through and be part of all these states upon its upward journey. Not only so, but before the human monad can possibly attain the climax of its material evolution, which is the grand terminus of its earthly incarnations, it must also have passed through certain phases of its existence upon each planet to which its microcosmic nature and the embodied man shall bear a mathematical correspondence. Thus, between the mineral and man, there is a perfect scale of life, no one form being parallel with another in the grand chain of cosmic being. Even the insects count in the links as progressive states, and the whole of the chain are 7 worlds through which the soul monad migrates, and from whatever point or planet it commences its toilsome cosmic journey. The 7th planet is the end of its material orbit, and the sphere within it attains the human form divine. Here it becomes conscious of life, able to learn and understand. In no case does the soul monad commence as a mineral and attain unto the animal or human plane upon the same planet. It rests or becomes latent on each alternate planet. For instance, the mineral atoms upon this earth will undergo a purely impersonal cycle upon Venus, which is their next sphere, and then become incarnated within the vegetable plane upon the next planet, and so on. While the mineral atoms of the planet Mars, when they reach the Earth, will be purely impersonal beings and not incarnated here as objective forms, but will pass their cycle in the astral spaces, then enter into material conditions upon Venus. Thus, the soul monad has 4 objective states. These 3 subjective states. The objective states are 1, 3, 5, 7. For example, the mineral, vegetable, animal, and man. These subjective states are as 2, 4, 6. Negative states of its embryonic being. The awakening to conscious life with ability to think and understand is carried out by the soul after it attains the objective human form of 7th state. The next state is beyond matter. Once and only once, says the law, after the human state, nature shuts the door behind her, eternally progressive in the anthem of all creative life. Note, we have omitted to note the exceptions to the general law of reincarnation, which have been set forth. There are 3 classes of exceptions in which rebirth within the human organism may be the usual course. Class 1, case of abortion or of stillborn children. These, not having attained consciousness of external human life, may, and in fact generally do, become reincarnated. Class 2, cases of natural born idiots. So through it is very rare that even idiots are lost to all external consciousness as to make rebirth necessary to them. Class 3, case of special Messianic incarnation by exalted souls for the special purpose of enlightening the race. The law which governs this mystery are unknown to all except the highest adepts. Such as incarnation transpires about every 600 years and never twice in succession to the same race. In all cases of messiahship, these glorious souls are conscious of their mission from the moment of birth. That, though doubtless they wisely keep such precious knowledge to themselves as a protection against the tender mercies of the dominant priesthood of their generation. Their class may be called cases of conscious reincarnation. The same spirit is never so incarnated more than once. Hence, the stories of Buddha's numerous incarnations are the pure fiction. When we apply these laws to external life, we can gauge the soul's past history with an accuracy which is truly marvelous. Thus, for instance, the truly martial individual belongs to that state of life known in occult phraseology as fiery, and consequently, those peculiar and especially attributes were rounded out upon the planet known as Mars. That, it is to say, the fiery characteristics of an atom belonging to that state of life corresponds to the fiery triplicity were evolved through various organic forms during its cycle of incarnation upon the planet Mars. On the other hand, a Saturnian individual during its sojourn upon the Martian planet was but little attracted to the martial forms of existence. In fact, the soul monad at that particular stage of its journey passed through a kind of impersonal coma instead of an active evolutionary life. This was because there was but little affinity between itself and the planet. Consequently, the planet had not sufficiently attractive powers to project the impersonal soul into the more outward form of organic being. The same may be said for each planetary characteristic. Their latent or active expression in the embodied individual reveals to the initiate mind the whole of the soul's past history during the various stages of its impersonal planetary life. A careful study of this fact will do much to explain the deeper mysteries of astrology. The planets at a person's birth do not make him what he is. Such truth. They only harmonize with his conditions. Let me say that again. The planets at a person's birth do not make him what he is. They only harmonize with his conditions. During the process of the soul's evolution, the monad is not actually incarnated in any form whatsoever. The soul descends into the earthly conditions down the subjective arc of the spiral and reascends upon the objective arc. Rebirth commences, as before stated, when the objective mineral state is reached. The process of the monad's descent through the various realms is accomplished by a gradual polarization of its deific powers, caused by its contact with the gradual externalizing conditions of the downward arc of the cycle. At each step, the soul becomes more and more involved within the material, the sphere of reincarnation, embracing the birth in an external form. It transient life there, then death, and then the same soul's rebirth in a higher and more perfect form of life is really comprised between the mineral plane and man. Between these two planes, the soul must pass through countless forms and phases. It is an absolute truth that, as an impersonal being, man lives upon many earths before he reaches this one. Myriads of worlds swarm in space, where the soul is in rudimental states performs its pilgrimages until its cyclical process enables it to reach the magnificently organized planet, whose glorious function it is to confer upon the soul self-consciousness. At this point alone does the soul become man. every other step of its wild cosmic journey, it is but an embryonic being, a fleeting, temporary shape of matter, an impersonal creature in which a part, but only a part, of the imprisonment soul shines forth, a rudimental form with rudimental functions. Every living, dying, then sustaining a brief spiritual existence only to be reborn again, and thus to sustain the successive round of births and deaths. New organs and new functions are acquired with each birth to be utilized by the gradual expanding soul as a means of further development. We see it in the fire of the flint and as atomic energy, and as we watch the revolving spark of the mineral soul, we can see it burst forth to the sunlight in the garb of a lowly lichen. It guards the snow-white purity of the lotus and animates the aromatic glory of the rose. It is the butterfly springing from the chrysolite shell and the nightingale singing in the grove. From stage to stage, it evolves new births and new deaths, a none to die, but sure to live again, ever striving and revolving upon the whirling, toilsome, dreadful, rugged path until it awakes from the last time upon earth, awakes once more a material shape, a thing of dust, a creature of flesh and blood, but now a man. The grand self-conscious state of humanity is attained, and the climax of earthly incarnation is reached. Never again will the soul enter the material matrix or suffer the pains of material reincarnation. Henceforth, its rebirths will be in the realm of spirit. Thus, who hold the strangely illogical doctrine of a multiplicity of human births have certainly never evolved the lucid state of soul consciousness within themselves. Had they done so, the theory of reincarnation is held by a vast number of talented men and women well versed in worldly wisdom would not have received the slightest recognition at the present day. We would strongly impress the fact that an external education is comparatively worthless as a means of obtaining a true knowledge of nature. Remember that though the acorn comes from oak, and the coconut, the palm, the oak, though giving birth to myriad others, never again becomes an acorn, nor the palm the juicy nut. So it is with man. When once the soul becomes incarnated in the human organism and thus attains the consciousness of external life, man becomes a self-responsible being, accountable for all his actions. This accountability constitutes his earth karma, which is explained in chapter 3, and the reward of punishment, as the case may be, is consciously and divinely administrated in the state which each individual soul has prepared for itself. The soul is not ignorantly ushered again into the world, completely unconscious of its past load of karma. Such a means of redemption, instead of being divine, would be void of justice. It would be diabolical. When human law punishes the criminal, he is conscious of the misdeed for which he is suffering. If this were not so, the punishment would be horribly unjust. For this reason, we do not punish irresponsible children nor insane people. It is thoroughly useless, however, to deal any further with such a transient delusion. We will therefore only say that all these so-called reawakenings of latent memories by which certain people profess to remember certain past lives can be explained, and in fact are only really explained by the simple law of affinity and form. The subject will be dealt with in the chapter upon mediumship, chapter 4. Each race of human beings is immortal in itself, so likewise is each round. 4. The first round never becomes the second, but those belonging to the first round become the parents of originators of the second. Each round constitutes a great planetary family which contains within itself races, subraces, minor groups of human souls, each state formed by the law of its karma, and the law of its form, and the law of its affinity, a trinity of laws. At the expiration of one round, the polar day of evolution is brought to a close, and the life waves leaves the shore, the planet. The second round of humanity, offsprings of the first, does not commence until the human life waves have gone around the whole planetary chain. Again, reaches the planet, a period of 15,552,000 years, as stated in Leclerc, Hermetica, chapter 5. The embryonic and personal soul becomes the man, just as the acorn becomes the oak, and the oak gives birth to many acorns or embryonic oaks. So man, in his turn, becomes the means of giving birth to many souls. There is a complete correspondence between the two. From what has been said, the student will perceive that each round of humanity becomes more numerous. As the population increases, the expanding material knowledge of each succeeding generation makes it possible for our Earth to sustain a greater number upon a given surface. All right, and it's the end of chapter 1, and then we'll continue chapter 2, the Hermetic Constitution of Man, and this is section 2, chapter 2, on the next recording. Until then, you guys have a good one. Oh, before I do that, if you'd like to be a guest reader on David Berry's channel, just give him send him an email or go into Discord and contact him by direct message. And until next time, you guys have a great day. Peace. Welcome back, everybody, to David Berry 75's channel. I'm your guest reader, Tony, and if you'd like to guest read, definitely give David send him an email, or you can go into Discord, or send him an email, or go into Discord and send him a message that you'd like to provide your voice to a book that we can all gain knowledge from. And we're going into part 1, section 2, chapter 2, the Hermetic Constitution of Man. The reader by this time should be somewhat familiar with the origin, nature, and activities of the divine ego, which gives birth to the spirit monad of man. All things originate as the objective outcome of the divine and subjective idea. The human ego is the offspring of that celestial harmony, a differentiated atom of diffusive, formless spirit. It was brought into being through the angelic activities of parental souls who are representative of love and wisdom, intelligence and truth. Within the sun sphere of creative life, we have endeavored to make these points as clear as possible because of their primary importance in realizing that the point in the arc which is claimed by the Buddhist occult and their followers as the origin of the soul's formation is not so, but is, in fact, only the great turning point, the bottom rung of the Jacob's esoteric ladder, upon which the soul makes its ascent and descent. The theosophists of the human reincarnation school, while admitting the absolute divinity of the ego, fail to account for the genesis of the soul, which the ego evolves otherwise than in matter, So far as we have been able to learn, not one of them has any conception as to how, when, or where the differentiation of the ego takes place, although they hold that there is a spiritual evolution preceding all material evolution. They consider that the first spiritual manifestation of the soul is an arcane mystery, known only by the highest adepts, these adepts of the Buddhist occultists. However, totally ignored the state of angelhood. They deny its existence because they, in their concentrated sphere of absolute selfhood, can form no conception of such a state. The charge of spirituality, selfishness, has often been made, even by theosophists, against the teachings of the Mahatmas, and there is a good foundation for the charge when their teachings are critically examined. Such a state is as much above and beyond the grasp of their minds as the doctrine of nirvana is beyond the grasp of the African bushman. They are particularly fond of applying to outsiders that proverb which intimidates, that they are more laws in heaven and earth than our dreams of in man's philosophy. But they fail to apply their truism to their own august selves. In our chapter upon reincarnation, we briefly point out the actual sphere of rebirth within objective form, and in doing so, many important features were omitted which appear to belong to the subject, but which in reality belong to the present one. Rebirth within progressive form is not for the sole purpose of evolving and energizing the latent powers of the human soul, as so many ignorantly imagine. If this were true, and man alone was the sole object of development, it would constitute the basis of absolute selfishness. We can safely assert that such human exclusiveness is only an appearance, as there is nothing approaching to selfishness in the creative design. When we penetrate below this plane of appearances, we find countless realm of beings equal as immortal as man, going through their cyclical rounds, obeying the small universal law of ourselves. These realms constitute stepping stones for external humanity in its journey towards the infinite. The organism of humanity, in their turn, from the evolutionary spheres or material means by which these same realms pass through their cycles of progressive life. If we make use of certain planes for our soul's advancement, it only follows as a matter of recreationary law, justice, that we should render an equivalent service in return. Hence, the importance of the true knowledge of our hidden or Hermetic Constitution. Man, as we behold him by means of our physical senses, appears to us a wonderful specimen of mechanical skills and architectural beauty. Each organic part is so exquisitely formed and in such perfect unison, one with another, and each with the whole. There is little wonder that the human organism has been taken as the finite type of the unknown infinite. If this be true upon the external plane, it is infinitely more so upon the internal plane. Here, bone, flesh, blood, and hair, the externals of the outward body, are seen to be nothing but the crystallization of ethereal force, held together by mental being, not held together as a matter of necessity for the sake of its own special evolution, but simply as the natural outcome, the physical reaction of its ethereal activities. In order to present a clear and definite picture of what man really is, we will formulate his Hermetic Constitution as follows. A. a physical form fourfold in its composition, consisting in a general sense of bones, blood, flesh, and hair. This form as a whole is composed of an infinite number of separate organic cells, each cell constituting a minute system of its own, which is in turn has been formed by the crystallization of imponderable forces around a living spirit entity. B, an electric vital body, seemingly composed of pale phosphorescent light, enclosing a glittering skeleton framework of electric fire. This is purely electromagnetic form, inseparable from the physical body during life, because this latter depends for its continued existence upon active presence of the physical form. The pale phosphorescent light presents a very perfect outline portrait of the physical body, while the fiery skeleton shows the interior electric nervous system of the organism. The branches of the nerve system spreading out in every direction from the great trunk lines of the brain and spinal column present to the trained spiritual sight the appearance of an infinitude of fine pencil rays of light darting in straight lines with inconceivable rapidity towards every point of the compass. C, an astral form so called because it is composed of magnetic light evolved by the planet. The astral light differs in quality and degree upon every orb in the universe. It is generated from the universal ether of space, and it may be said to be the ether under a change of form and capacity. It is the soul of the material planet, consequently the cause world of that planet's external phenomenon. To give a better and truer idea of this almost unknown astral light, we will illustrate. We say that water is the universal material flood. This is a truth, but some water is salty, some brackish, some bitter, others sulfuric, sweet, or fresh. This is exactly the case with the astral fluid. It differs upon every star. It is this difference that constitutes the strikingly different qualities of planetary influence. With this slight digression, we resume. This astral form presents a perfect image of the external personality, even to style and condition of the clothing worn at the time. This form is easily separable from the physical organism and constitutes that true or real personality. By personality, we don't mean the individuality or the identity of the person, but we mean the persona or appearance assumed by the soul during its sojourn within the material vortices or planes of cosmic force. This form is under the direct control of the mental being animating it, and under suitable conditions can be made to assume temporarily any ideal image or form within the grasp of the dominating mind. When the astral doubles and absent from the physical body, the latter is awake, performs whatever it may be engaged in doing in a purely automatic or mechanical manner. At the same time, it is susceptible to any planar injury which may befall the absent double. The astral is also specially susceptible to magical operations. Probably 9/10 of all black magical injury are operated by means of or upon these ethereal forms. D, the animal soul is that section of the animating entity incarnated within the microcosm, which constitutes the lower arc of its universe. This animal soul is formless as regards its separate expression and can be traced only in the lower line and shading of the human continent. It is the continuance, I think. It is the seat of the selfish, brutal desire, which are in themselves lower than the human sphere, but are evolving upward through it from the animal. Their activities are strictly confined to the astral and material planes. E, the spiritual body per se, is a finely etherealized organism, which is in the majority of the present generations, it's either latent or embryonic. This body constitutes the human form, divine in the higher sphere of the soul world, where man becomes the angel, and in its white robe of golden crown, given the elect in the apocalypse of St. John. In other words, it is the soul's expression of the heavenly remnant of the purified man. F. The divine soul is that section of the entity incarnated within the microcosm, which constitutes the higher arc of its universe. The soul, like the lower one, is formless, as it is separate expression and can be traced only in the higher line of the human continent. It is the seat of the good, unselfish, noble aspiration, and of all these actions would spring forth spontaneously to walk the weak, to aid the weak, the suffering and afflicted, unassociated with any interested motives of self. G, the spirit, the pure spirit entity itself, called the divine ego. This is the divine atom of life, the vital spark, the central controlling spiritual sun of the microcosm. It is never incarnated within the form until the seventh state of or perfect manhood is attained. The above are the exact divisions of the human constitution as viewed from without and within. Upon the surface, this division will not appear to differ very materially from the septenary volume or the Buddhist cult, but in reality, there is all the difference which exists between cause and effect. The chief point of difference will be found in the fifth principle, as they term it, and which is called also the human soul, manas, or mind. Mind, though correct in some respects, is, to say the least, a very vague and unsatisfactory term to express intellectual capacity or the power of thinking and reasoning, and reduces the objects of thought to a science. For this reason, mind exists as a motive force all the way from the mineral to man, and surely Buddhists will not say the rock contains mind. Their fifth principle it is upon this point in particular where, in the opinion of the students of Hermetic philosophy, that esoteric Buddhists made a very serious mistake. It is the evolution of this principle, we are told, that gives us the power of understanding. Without this, we should be upon the plane of the animal and act from mere instinct. When this principle is active, man becomes noble, humane, and capable of understanding, or in other words, instead of being a creature of instinct only, he becomes a reasonable being. We question the whole of such teachings. For instance, a man may be the intellectual giant of his age, so far as mere mental capacity is concerned, and yet at the same time be the most selfish, unjust, and immoral. History teems with such examples, while at the same time, some of the nature's noblest souls have been those whose intellectual abilities have been very much below the average of the race. There are intellectual animals among mankind, human only in form, while on the other hand, there are many demented human beings whose souls are akin to the angels. This fifth principle, we are told on page 175 of the Mystery of Ages, is the highest principle of the animals. But Hermetic entities deny this in tutu. They assert that this principle is no principle at all, but merely a form. This is a real fact. There are only 3 principles in an active state: animal, human, and deific. The remaining 4 are merely forms of reactions. It is in the action and reaction of these principles which produce every class of mental phenomena in existence, be it vegetable sensitiveness, animal instinct, human reason, or deific perception. They form the 3 primary colors of the soul's spectrum, while the remaining forms are simply complementary reactions. The Hermetic Constitution of Man consists of 3 active principles, all emanations from one universal principle and 4 secondary reactions. This constitution will correspond to the trinity of the ancient Gnostics and the modern spiritualists as consisting of body, soul, and spirit in the following manner: body, A and B; soul, C and D; spirit, E, F, and G. It also corresponds to the quaternary and fourfold constitutions of the Kabbalist and the Greek speculators of Egyptian theosophy, who's taught that there is a body, an astral or magnetic body, the animal soul, and the divine soul. Body, which is A and B; astral body, C; animal soul, which is D; divine soul, E, F, and G. And so may we proceed with every system of which we have any knowledge that only contradicts. The only contradictions are the appearances upon the surface, chiefly due to an insufficient use or to a misuse of terms. In reality, there is no difference in any system when it is traced to its primal source. The same may be said of the Buddhist constitution when understood in its true spirit. The radical differences are due to their gross misinterpretations of one fundamental law, one truth, one principle, one agent, law, and one word. And we now briefly sketch the Hermetic Constitution and present the fourfold teaching of the Western initiation. Man consists of 3 duads and the ego, the total of 7, which stands in the realization of refraction and reflection to each other. They are as follows. First duad, A, reflection, physical body; B, refraction, electric magnetic form. Second duad, C, astral body; D, animal soul; G, the true ego. And third duad is E, spiritual form; and F, divine soul. The whole of these 3 duads are controlled and carried forward to the cyclical orbit by the divine ego and absolute atomic spirit entity. Thus, the 3 duads and the ego constitute the fourfold microcosm of the Hermetic schools. This is the most perfect system that can be formulated in words because the duads travel in pairs. At death, we lose A and B. Then, during our purgatual process through the sphere of purification is the soul states of the embodied humanity. C and D are gradually thrown off, not separated as one would quarter up an orange, but gradually thrown off atom by atom as they are ready to move forward upon their progressive journey. The unprepared atoms are liberated and sent forward upon their own special lines, and all gross matter eliminated. The animal principles are no portions of the purified soul, and are dispersed or separate cells within the cause world, and ultimately nothing is left but the Trinity, E, F, and G, and spiritual form, the divine soul and true ego, or rather the duad, E and F, because the true ego, G, does not become a part of the duad until it is ascended beyond the soul spheres. At this point, man is the positive or male spirit of the ego, woman the negative or female. The true angel requires the spiritual union of both principles. Man, as he appears to be the outward sight, is, as we have shown, very different from the being within. He contains a universe of life with his organism, excuse me. Countless myriads of spirit atoms are evolving through him and are as independent of him in reality as man is of the planet which gave him birth. The truly human being is the most interior or spiritual soul, the whole of the lower nature, and the external organisms are only the various realms of being which the human monad has conquered and subjected to its imperial rule during its cyclical journey. We should say, to be true, that the internals are the reflection of those elemental states molded more or less rudely by the human soul after its own divine form. The millions of separate entities within the human spheres are more the real man than the 40 million inhabitants of France, where Napoleon, who ruled them with his imperial will. A few words now regarding the will and the reason, and we must close. Will is universal, and it is as impossible to point out where it begins or where it ends as it is to separate the colors of the rainbow. The power of the will upon the external plane depends upon the strength of the electro-vital constitution B, while upon the spiritual plane will depends upon the activity of the spiritual constitutions E. Within the spiritual plane, the potent will must have both of these, B and E, well developed to be successful. If B alone is potent, only the elemental realms can be contacted. If only E is active, then the higher or spiritual world will be contacted, not the astral. Under these circumstances, nothing but mediumship can be attained. The true form of training then is to evolve that which is most latent, so as to bring about the equilibrium in the great majority of cases, of course, is the spiritual. It is the spiritual that requires evolving. Considering the will as a universal power, it naturally follows that the strength of our will must depend entirely upon the capacity we possess for absorbing and reprojecting their power. In effect, man's will is only limited by the capacity to absorb the one universal will. This will is not it itself a principle, it is only an active result. For instance, sentinel matter is rapid motion. Everything utilizes some portions of this will in its own particular way. The reason, mañas or mind, is simply mental capacity, and like the will, it's not a principle but a result. Intellect is the offspring of innumerable and constantly changing causes or combination of force, never repeated under exactly the same conditions. Consequently, no two people are exactly alike. The seat or mainspring of reason, intellect, and understanding and mind is consciousness, and whether it will be good or evil will depend upon the respective activities of the animal and the divine soul. The higher the soul evolves, the more spiritual the understanding becomes. Under the perfect rapport with the divine spirit is attained. This is the true at one moment man made perfect. From the foregoing, the students must perceive that a man may be a perfect intellectually genius upon the physical plane, and at the same time be a veritable idiot in a spiritual sense. Very many intellectuals are standing before the world today and being accepted at the grand repositories of absolute knowledge because most of mankind are wholly engrossed in worldly affairs and spiritually asleep. All right, so that ends part 1, section 2, chapter 2, the Hermetic Constitution of Man. And if you'd like to be a guest reader on David Berry's channel, definitely send him an email, or go ahead and go into Discord and send him a direct message. We definitely would like to hear some various voices out there. We can't evolve if we don't come out of our shells and take risk, and it will evolve us in many different levels. So until next time, I'm your guest reader, Tony, and you have a great day. Bye.